Most horror films borrow from real life. But every so often, a film does something far more unsettling. It reveals a crime that hasn't happened yet. Tonight, on the Night Shriek, we open a dossier of stories that challenge everything we think we know about coincidence. These aren't movies inspired by true events. These are movies that seem to foreshadow true events depicting crimes, killers, and chilling details long before police, reporters, or the public ever learned the truth. Scripts captured methods no investigator had documented. Scenes mirrored crime scenes that wouldn't be discovered for months. Characters resembled real people who had not yet stepped into the headlines. Some called these parallels flukes. Some believed the filmmakers stumbled onto something buried in the collective subconscious, and others insisted that certain stories find their way into the world whether we're ready for them or not. What you're about to hear blurs the boundary between prediction and nightmare. A collection of 15 cases where horror films seem to gaze into the darkness ahead of time, reflecting tragedies that were still waiting to surface. If you think fiction can't anticipate reality, you may feel very differently by the end of this episode. Would you like me to continue with the next part? Fact 1. The Psychic. 1977. The Psychic revolves around a woman plagued by fragmented visions that gradually lead her toward a murder hidden behind a sealed wall. Decades later, a woman in New England reported a series of impressions about an abandoned building she insisted she had never seen. She described a mismatched brick wall, a shattered window above a rusted staircase, and the presence of something concealed within the structure. Her account was so detailed that police reluctantly agreed to investigate. Inside the building, they found a freshly patched section of wall exactly where she said it would be. When officers broke through it, they discovered human remains arranged in a manner uncannily similar to the film's climactic scene. The woman had no logical explanation for how she knew any of it. For seasoned investigators, the case became one of the most unsettling examples of fiction and reality converging, where a cinematic vision seemed to prefigure a crime that had gone unseen for years. Fact 2. The Premonition. 1976. In The Premonition, a mother becomes tormented by vivid visions of her daughter in mortal danger, glimpses she can neither interpret nor escape. Years later, a real case in Mississippi mirrored the film with startling clarity. A woman began experiencing disturbing mental images, her child stranded beside an abandoned vehicle, a desolate field stretching endlessly behind her, and a shadowed figure approaching from the tree line. She described these scenes to authorities. Before anyone realized the girl was missing, when police eventually located the child, the environment matched the mother's descriptions, down to the placement of debris and the tilt of the rusted car. What deepened the mystery were the kidnapper's grainy photographs, unevenly exposed images eerily similar to the dreamlike visuals of the film. Investigators struggled to reconcile the overlap, debating whether the woman's visions were coincidence, intuition, or something far more enigmatic. Fact 3. The Stepdaughter. 1976. The Stepdaughter focuses on a young woman whose jealousy and fractured identity push her toward acts of manipulation and violence. Years later, a suburban Midwestern household witnessed a chillingly similar unraveling. A teenage girl began staging minor accidents around the home, crafting letters designed to shift blame onto others, and recording disturbing diary entries that mirrored the psychological descent portrayed in the film. When the situation escalated, investigators discovered her carefully rehearsed behavior patterns resembled those of the movie's antagonist, down to the emotional cadence of the written notes and the methodical way she set up scenes to mislead her family. A forensic expert reviewing the case remarked that the parallels were so precise they felt rehearsed. Even though the girl had no known connection to the film, the disturbing overlap left many questioning whether certain stories emerge independently or whether some narratives manifest themselves in life the moment they're imagined. Fact 4. When a Stranger Calls 1979, the terror of When a Stranger Calls lies in a single revelation. The phone calls tormenting a young babysitter are coming from inside the house in Illinois, a case unfolded that made the film's premise feel terrifyingly possible. A teenage babysitter phoned police after receiving whispered calls, soft, rhythmic breathing, and a voice repeating her name. When the call was traced, officers discovered it originated from a disconnected line inside the residence. Their search of the house led them to the attic, where they found evidence that someone had been living there unnoticed. Discarded wrappers, a sleeping area formed from old blankets, and a narrow vantage point overlooking the children's room. The discovery played out like a real-life reenactment of the film's most iconic twist. For the officers who responded, the resemblance wasn't just unsettling, it was unforgettable. Fact 5. The Changeling, 1980. The Changeling follows a grieving composer who moves into a sprawling old mansion, only to uncover the traces of a child whose tragic fate was hidden for decades. Not long after the film gained its reputation as a masterpiece of supernatural storytelling, a real investigation in Colorado brought its narrative disturbingly close to life. Tenants of a historic property reported rhythmic knocking, cold drafts, and small objects shifting on their own phenomena they couldn't explain. When investigators searched the home, they uncovered a cache of belongings beneath warped floorboards, all tied to a boy who had gone missing generations earlier. The architecture of the house, its narrow staircases, sealed attic spaces, and forgotten chambers mirrored the movie so closely that detectives privately admitted feeling as though they were stepping into the film's most iconic scenes. What began as a ghost story became a real excavation of a long-silenced truth. Fact 6. The Dark Night of the Scarecrow, 1981. This somber tale of an innocent man hunted by fearful townsmen gained a second, darker life when a real tragedy emerged in a Midwestern farming community. A mentally challenged man, wrongfully accused of harming a child, fled into the fields, choosing the exact kind of hiding place portrayed in the film. A patch of farmland bordered by leaning fence posts and looming scarecrows, the confrontation that followed mirrored the movie's moral reckoning with chilling fidelity. After his death, several of the men involved reported strange sensations, flickering lights in empty barns, figures moving along the tree line, and an overwhelming feeling that someone or something was watching them. Journalists covering the case noted the uncanny parallels, remarking that the real-life events felt like a grim echo of the film's haunting narrative. It was as though the story had stepped out of the screen and demanded justice of its own. Fact 7. Funeral Home 1980. Funeral Home presents a decaying mortuary shrouded in secrets, where disappearances and hidden histories converge beneath dim lights and narrow hallways. Months after the film gained cult attention, police in Ontario uncovered a real funeral facility, steeped in eerily similar mysteries, misplaced death certificates, unexplained remains, and an unsettling pattern of missing persons pointed toward long-buried wrongdoing. Even the physical space matched. A cramped concrete stairwell leading into a hidden basement, improvised ventilation carved into old stone, and a layout nearly identical to the movie's tension-filled setting. A former employee described the director's late-night routines in the embalming room: ritualistic, quiet, and deeply unnerving, echoing the film's final revelations. For investigators, the case blurred the line between coincidence and premonition, as though the film had unintentionally traced the contours of a true horror waiting to be exposed. Fact 8. The Little Girl Who Lives Down the Lane, 1976. In The Little Girl Who Lives Down the Lane, a seemingly self-sufficient young girl masks a terrible truth beneath her calm exterior. Years later, an investigation on the East Coast uncovered a real situation that mirrored the film with disturbing closeness. A teenage girl had been living alone for months, offering neatly rehearsed explanations to neighbors about her missing guardians. Only when authorities finally entered the house did they uncover the truth. Traces of a concealed death, household tasks meticulously maintained to avoid suspicion, and personal records arranged in a way that suggested a carefully sustained facade. The precision with which she kept up the illusion-sorting mail, managing bills, tightly controlling access to the home echoed the film's protagonist so closely that investigators later said the resemblance felt Like a script someone had followed without ever seeing the movie, it was as though fiction and reality had aligned in a way neither side intended. Fact 9. Don't Go to Sleep, 1982. This eerie TV movie explores the psychological disintegration of a family haunted by grief and something more after its broadcast. A California household became the center of a case that bore disturbing similarities. A surviving child described speaking with an unseen presence, recounting details nearly identical to the apparition portrayed in the film. Strange behavior began to fracture the family. Sleep disturbances, sudden mood swings, and messages hidden in drawers and notebooks, reflecting anger and guilt reminiscent of the movie's emotional core. When investigators uncovered letters written in the child's trembling hand, the tone and cadence echoed scenes from the film almost exactly. A consulting psychologist remarked that the parallels were uncomfortably precise, raising the question of whether the movie had tapped into a universal pattern of unresolved trauma or if something darker had threaded its way from fiction into a living household. Fact 10. The Toolbox Murders, 1978. The Toolbox Murders paints a grim picture of a killer who transforms ordinary tools into instruments of ritualized violence. Dismissed as sensationalism when it premiered, the film's reputation shifted when detectives in the Pacific Northwest were confronted with a case that followed an almost identical pattern. The same assortment of tools, the same methodical progression of attacks, and even the assailant's unsettling fixation on moral absolution echoed the film's darkest scenes. One crime scene included a radio softly playing a late-night sermon, an obscure detail from the movie that few outside dedicated fans would even remember. Stranger still, records confirmed that the earliest murder predated the movie's release in that region, making influence impossible. Instead of life imitating art, it felt as though the film had inadvertently captured a template already unfolding in the real world. Fact 11. Edge of the Axe, 1988. When Edge of the Axe circulated through video stores, most viewers saw it as another masked killer slasher, unnerving, but hardly extraordinary. That changed when a secluded mountain community began reporting sightings of a figure wearing a blank, porcelain white mask, standing motionless along forest roads and near collapsing barns. Soon after, a cluster of attacks occurred in remote spots, each eerily reflecting the film's rhythm and brutality. One scene in particular, the discovery of a victim beside a car wash with water still running, was replicated with chilling accuracy in real life. Deputies struggled to understand whether someone was intentionally mimicking the movie or whether the disturbing likenesses emerged on their own. The mask was never recovered, the assailant never identified, and the townspeople were left with a fear that the line between invention and intrusion had quietly dissolved. Fact 12. Deadly Messages, 1985. In Deadly Messages, terror begins when a woman uncovers frantic writing hidden beneath a mirror, hinting at a prior tenant's tragic fate. A strikingly similar discovery was made in the Midwest, where a renter peeled back aged wallpaper to reveal desperate scrawls begging for help. The handwriting bore the same panicked slant and looping repetition used in the film's props, yet these messages belonged to a woman who had disappeared nearly 10 years earlier. For investigators, the parallels felt almost spectral, as if the movie had captured the tone and terror of a plea that went unheard for too long. The timing of the discovery, coming so soon after the film's broadcast, only deepened the sense that fiction and forgotten truth had collided in a way no one could explain. Fact 13. The Silent Scream, 1979. In The Silent Scream, a college student rents a room in a coastal home where something horrifying hides behind a locked upstairs door. Months later, investigators handling a missing person case uncovered a nearly identical setup, a seaside boarding house with an attic room sealed off from the world. Inside, they found evidence of prolonged captivity, scratched floorboards, improvised bedding, and damaged tapes containing faint, terrified cries. The layout of the house matched the film's claustrophobic architecture almost perfectly: narrow hallways, steep staircases, and a door bolted shut from the outside. Detectives were struck not only by the physical similarities but also by the emotional cadence of the case. It felt as though the film had unintentionally echoed a nightmare that had been unfolding quietly, long before anyone thought to look behind that locked door. Fact 14. Death Valley, 1985. Death Valley was originally seen as a tense desert thriller, a simple story of a family crossing lonely highways under the watchful eyes of an unseen killer, but shortly after its release, a pattern of real murders began surfacing across remote stretches of the Southwest, and the echoes of the film were impossible to ignore. Travelers were attacked near abandoned service stops, their personal belongings arranged in deliberate sequences eerily similar to the killer's calling card in the movie. Witnesses reported a weathered pickup truck fleeing more than one scene, matching the same make and silhouette featured on screen. What truly rattled local deputies was the sense that the desert itself concealed a long-standing danger, something the film had unintentionally mapped out before the truth emerged. Fiction suddenly felt less like invention and more like recognition. Fact 15. Eyes of Laura Mars, 1978. When Eyes of Laura Mars premiered, audiences were captivated by its premise of a photographer plagued by visions she cannot explain. But the film took on a far more disturbing tone once a series of murders in New York began unfolding with uncanny similarity to what Laura sees through her lens. Victims were positioned theatrically, posed in ways that echoed her stylized fashion shoots, details too specific to dismiss. Even more unsettling, several individuals connected to the art and fashion world became targets. Mirroring the film's focus, investigators later learned that one detective had screened the movie days before the killings began, a coincidence that only fueled speculation. Whether the film unknowingly captured the emerging pattern of a real predator or merely echoed something looming in the city's shadows, its alignment with the crimes left detectives and viewers alike deeply unsettled. Would you like me to move on to the next fact? Bonus. Bad Ronald. Version 3. Bad Ronald tells the story of a troubled boy concealed within the walls of his own home, secretly observing the world outside through narrow cracks in the plaster. For years, the film was dismissed as an unsettling but far-fetched TV thriller, until a real case emerged that felt like its chilling echo. In a quiet southern neighborhood, a family began noticing odd disturbances, food vanishing from the pantry, items subtly repositioned overnight, and soft shuffling noises emanating from within the walls. At first, they blamed pests or faulty construction, but when strange, childlike notes began appearing under door frames. They realized someone else was inside their home. Police opened part of the interior wall and discovered a cramped crawl space fully outfitted for habitation. Blankets, scattered belongings, and crude sketches adorned the hidden chamber drawings of the family, rendered from the viewpoint of someone watching them in secret. The narrow peepholes cut into the drywall echoed the voyeuristic angles from the film, and the intruder appeared to have lived there for months, unnoticed. For the officers on the scene, the parallels went beyond coincidence. The hidden room, the obsessive artwork, the eerie silence behind the walls all mirrored the film's narrative with unsettling precision. What had once seemed like an exaggerated fiction was now a chilling reality, a nightmare living just beyond the surface of everyday life. If these stories have shown anything tonight, it's that the line separating imagination from reality is far thinner and far darker than most of us want to believe. These films didn't borrow from criminal cases, they reflected them before the world even knew those cases existed. Scenes written in silence became echoes of future headlines. Characters crafted from fiction seem to walk straight into real investigations. So the next time you watch a horror movie and think its premise is too strange, too impossible, or too exaggerated to ever be true, remember what you've heard here. Remember how stories can surface before their real-world counterparts. Remember how shadows on a screen can sometimes whisper the truth long before anyone else is listening. If you're ready to keep following those whispers, to explore the places where fiction brushes against the unknown, you already know where to come. This is The Night Shriek. and the night is still full of secrets.